I think it's safe to say that we can take Endgame with a very large pinch of salt. It reads like a threatening letter from an ex-girlfriend determined to ruin life for everyone else.
Frankly, it should be his own Endgame. You're not a journalist. You don't do your research. You haven't even got any sources.
The royal family isn't fighting for survival. Harry and Meghan are.
Harry, Meghan, and now Omid Scobie weaponize race relations.
I don't believe any racist comments were ever made by any of the royal family. I'm going to cut through all this crap. I'm going to tell you the names of the two senior royals who are named in that Dutch version of the book. Well, Scobie is back with a spiteful, lie-filled new book that's poured fuel on the flames. He says that Meghan wrote private letters to King Charles, naming two royals who she accuses of taking part in those supposedly troubling conversations about Archie's skin colour. Scobie initially said he knew the names but couldn't legally report them. But of course, he could have done outside of the UK. He could have done it in America if he wanted to, where the book is published. He could have done it anywhere. But he said he never names names, which is another of his lies. And yet overnight they were sensationally revealed, suddenly, out of nowhere, in the Dutch version of Scobie's book. Journalists had been sent copies and the book was briefly on sale in bookstores before being suddenly withdrawn in a dash by the publishers. Scobie initially said it was a translation error, which didn't really make any sense because how do you mistranslate names? They're either there or they're not. The publisher now says it wasn't translation, it was simply an error. But how did that error happen? How is there an entire different version appearing in a Dutch edition of this book? The consequence of that error is that millions of people online around the world now know the royals are again being implicated in what I think is a completely baseless claim of inferred racism. There is, again, massive speculation about who the people are who were supposedly making comments about Archie's skin colour, which is incredibly unfair to all the royal family. They've all been tarred with this brush now for years. Well, I'm going to end all this nonsense because, frankly, if a book is on the streets in Holland, available to Dutch people, containing names that Omid Scobie, the lick-spittle scribe for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the man who you may remember denied they had any involvement in the last book. And so did Meghan. Do you remember? No, nothing to do with it. But then in court, many months after the book was published, under oath, she had to admit she had emailed her aides briefing notes for when they met Scobie. So she was one of his primary sources on that first book. Now again, we're being told she had nothing to do with this. And maybe she didn't. And maybe we should be believing Omid Scobie when he says he did not ever write these names down in any draft of his book. It just somehow popped up in the Dutch version of the book. How? I've written 10 books, I think it is now. I've never had a version of my book pop up in a foreign edition that contained unbelievably damning allegations about two of the most famous people in the world, and I had nothing to do with it and didn't know how it got there, and nor did anybody else. How does it get there, Omid? Surely you as the author, I mean, you must be furious, right? You must be demanding. Heads roll. And you want names, don't you, ironically, Omid, about who did this to you? Who besmirched your reputation as an author? I would, Omid. I'd want to know right now, especially if I was trying to convince the world that I had nothing to do with it myself and I'd never, ever put these names in writing and maybe some lawyer had come along and told me not to. I mean, that couldn't possibly have happened because you've given us your word. And as I've established so far in this monologue, your word is your bond and should be taken as sacrosanct. Well, I'm going to cut through all this crap. I'm going to tell you the names of the two senior royals who are named in that Dutch version of the book. Because frankly, if Dutch people wandering into a bookshop can pick it up and see these names, then you, British people here, who actually pay for the British royal family, you're entitled to know too. And then we can have a more open debate about this whole farrago, because I don't believe any racist comments were ever made by any of the royal family. And until there is actual evidence of those comments being made, I will never believe it. But now we can start the process of finding out if they ever got uttered, what the context was, and whether there was any racial intent at all. Like I say, I don't believe there was. The royals who are named in this book are King Charles and Catherine, Princess of Wales.
It doesn't make any sense that the only version in which these two names appeared was in Holland, which has been called a publishing error, not anywhere else.
Cock-up or conspiracy?
Cock-up, what loads of people are texting and emailing, and I'll read some of that in a bit, saying this is the marketing ploy of the decade. The dangerous thing is that it implies that there is guilt when there is absolutely no fact. And thus Piers did what he did because online, Sarah, speculation will mount and mount and mount.
Yeah, and I'm not here to talk about Piers' justification for naming names or otherwise, but let's talk about this. You talk about the marketing ploy. It does remind me somewhat of when Spare was leaked in Spain, and that got a lot of headlines.
Leave that out there, Sarah Houston. Very good,
yeah. Talking about this, aren't we? From the palace perspective, they would very much have been hoping that this had already gone away, actually, when Harry and Meghan had distanced themselves from it and they could put their heads down and rise above this. Don't want to get involved in this transatlantic tit-for-tat. And actually, we were starting to see potentially a thawing of relations, a conversation between Harry and his father, all that problematic in itself because that was briefed to the media.
If they were nothing to do with this book, and despite their links to Omid Scobie before, apparently they had no knowledge, come out and damn well say it, because if you don't come out and say it, the British public, I don't care what all the do-gooders tell me, the British public will nail this on them as being against the royal family, and it will further, well, I think they're beyond damage, sorry, I genuinely do.
Harry, Meghan, and now Omid Scobie weaponize race relations. They utilize, you know, this tenseness that specifically we have in the United States around race to basically make a living.
Yeah.
And I think that that's egregious. I think it's disgusting. And I think it's hateful. There's no proof to what's being said. And it's, at the end of the day, it's incredibly cruel to do to the family as well. We know Harry and Meghan are very sensitive. They're destructive, and they exaggerate all of their claims.
Now, it's hard to imagine someone more unqualified to opine about the royal family than Omid Scobie, the self-appointed insider who's currently doing the bidding in the media for the Duke and Duchess of Netflix. The Montecito Massive, yes, it's them again, Harry and Meghan, as if their fanciful odyssey to California wasn't enough to write about. He's come up with yet another load of old bollocks to call non-fiction. First, it was Finding Freedom, his 2020 tome about how hard done by multi-millionaire royal heir Harry was by his family, and how poor little Meghan couldn't be the best princess in the palace. Now, we get Endgame from Odious, which he niftily subtitles Inside the Royal Family and the Monarchy's Fight for Survival. Of course, it's nothing of the sort. According to Scobie, Meghan and Harry haven't spoken to him about anything in his new book, but he says their friends have. Not sure they've got any left, but I guess we'll take his word for that one. He says Meghan doesn't want to return to England. Good. He says Harry doesn't care if he gets an apology or not. Also good. Claims the Princess of Wales hasn't spoken to Meghan in 4 years. Brilliant. I mean, why would you? Trouble is, of course, scabies and the truth are not familiar bedfellows. He's already admitted lying to the Times about his age. Piers Morgan pointed out on his show last night that references to him in the book are entirely made up. And as for his face, most of it looks like it was crafted out of the leftover wax at Madame Tussauds. I think it's safe to say that we can take Endgame with a very large pinch of salt. It's very clear to see what's going on here. As I said last night, it reads like a threatening letter from an ex-girlfriend determined to ruin life for everyone else. A bitter, twisted and hysterical call for attention.
We're all used to lots and lots of royal books coming out all the time. A lot of them are full of inaccuracies, many of those inaccuracies reasonably harmless. But this book has been described as spiteful, ruthless, horrible, and it is very, very hurtful to everybody in the royal family, apart from, big surprise, the saintly Harry and Meghan. Now, Sarah Vine's got a good piece in the Daily Mail today, Angela. I wonder what you thought about it. What we're hearing, Omid Scobie is busy saying, oh, they're not really that, they're not my friends, I'm not that close to them, da, da, da. But he is seen as their mouthpiece. And what is Sarah suggested, and I think it's a good suggestion, since they are distancing themselves from this book to some extent, it is incumbent upon them, is it not, to denounce this book. If they don't denounce it, they in effect endorse it. And if they endorse it, the chance of any kind of peace and harmony in our royal family is dashed forever.
They can't make excuses for it, actually. I mean, you know, they would have read it. Meghan would have read it. Meghan read Harry Spare. Meghan has got to be in charge of all these things. And of course, it's absolutely right. My feeling is that if Harry doesn't get the lawyers onto them within a week, onto him within a week, then something ought to be done. I think it's really terrible. He loves taking people to court, and he should do that about things that are not unreal and spiteful. And also, how come about these King to Meghan letters? Has he read them? Does he quote them? I mean, Meghan sued her father and the Mail on Sunday for use extract from his letters. So I think it's even more important than the one about the King should be done. And if she doesn't do that, then she's also should be attacked in whatever verbal way that people can. It's just not right. You can't imagine the King letting anybody else show a private letter, can you? You can imagine Meghan showing it to a friend, who shows it to a friend, who shows it to the writer. I can't even bear saying his name, you know.
It looks like sour grapes, doesn't it? You know, because we've seen in the sort of, you know, the run-up to this book being published, lots of stories appearing in the papers which appear to be from at the very least, friends of or people close to the Sussexes, you know, suggesting there was a phone call of rapprochement made, suggesting that there was kind of a possibility that they might come back for Christmas, talk of Harry looking for somewhere to stay here, almost as though that was kind of orchestrated in preparation for this kind of wham, bam, you know, no thank you, ma'am, as they would say.
Well, I mean, it's all those things are quite possible to have happened. It's not very... Harry might, you know, have wanted to come over for Christmas. I thoroughly doubt it, but you know, maybe he did. And maybe he does want somewhere to stay here where he feels safe. I mean, these are stories that have been going around for some time. And I just think that if the Sussexes, as they say, are not involved, why on earth don't they issue a personal statement saying, we had absolutely nothing to do with this book and we do not agree with any of the opinions. They are purely the opinions of Omid Scobie. That would, you know, at least give them a bit of ground.
The reviews are in for Endgame, and they've been, well, less than favourable. In the New York Times, they said that the book reads like a press release cooked up by ChatGPT. Another review describes Scobie's portrayal as unfailingly sympathetic to the Sussexes, which paints Meghan and Harry in a relentlessly saintly light. And The Telegraph gives it 2 stars, saying it's ludicrous propaganda for Team Sussex.
Not only that, he got the time of the Queen's announcement of her death completely wrong. He got the date of her funeral completely wrong. Even the basics you could get off Wikipedia, the man doesn't seem to have gotten right. And he talks about Endgame. This is his sad little fantasy, isn't it? For some reason, he's just hell-bent on wanting the royal family to disappear. Thinks he can make a, you know, quid or two off the back of it. He probably can, because there'll be miserable old Republicans out there who'll buy that piece of rubbish. But, I mean, frankly, it should be his own Endgame. You're not a journalist. You don't do your research. You haven't even got any sources. You can't attribute anything to anybody. It's just speculation, and it's just nasty.
You know, this throws up so many questions again that the royal family have done their best to sort of move away from. Again, about, is there racism in the family? If so, who was it? Was it racist? Was it not? How do you think they're going to try and manage this?
Yeah, and don't forget, I mean, railroaded poor lady Susan Hussey. I mean, they acted so quickly, so swiftly, and so aggressively. Yeah, as soon as those accusations happened, and I do think that was a direct reflection of the way that the world responded to the Oprah Winfrey accusations. So how will they respond to this? I believe it's going to be never complain, never explain again. I think that there are so many errors that have been pointed out in Omid's book so far. It's so clearly from a one-sided perspective that people are really critical of it. And I believe that they are probably in a much safer space today going up against someone like Omid Scobie than they were several years ago in the middle of the George Floyd riots, when, you know, race was so polarizing here in the United States at the time of the Oprah Winfrey interview. I don't think this is going to have as much of a negative effect as it did back in 2021.
Well, what can Meghan and Harry do? Can they come out and say, no, there's no issue? Where do we go with this? Everyone seems to be slightly backed into a corner.
Well, this is really interesting, and this is one of the things that's come out of this morning. And I would respectfully suggest that Omid Scobie's book has so many inaccuracies, starting with the fact that apparently Queen Camilla phoned Piers Morgan the night that he walked out of Good Morning Britain. No, absolutely wrong, because he'd have told all of us, trust me, a million times. Here's the thing. Scobie's got past. He has. Harry and Meghan have got a past, and people will equate the two. It's what happens next. We've been asking all morning. The implications, Belly, for the royal family. It's always been keep calm and carry on, say nothing. James Bloodworth made a great point this hour when he said maybe the onus is on Harry and Meghan, who have said, oh, we didn't speak, and Scobie went, we didn't speak. Maybe they need to come out and say this is nothing to do with us. What do you reckon?
Well, they've created the issue. Let's be honest. They're the reasons it all came out. So it actually behoves them perhaps to actually put their heads above the parapet. Omid Scobie says he didn't talk directly to Meghan and Harry for this latest book, but he talked to people who were in the know in their circle to help write the book. So actually, presumably this all came from that group of friends or whoever it was. So they've created this problem. They're the couple that can diffuse the problem, because we know the only time we've ever heard the royal family say anything is when the initial allegations were made, and William made that comment by saying that the family is not racist. And that's about the only thing we've had from the royal family since we've seen the Netflix documentary, since Oprah, since Spare came out. That's the nearest thing to a full-blown sort of reaction from the royal family. So the problem's been created by Meghan and Harry. They're the ones who can diffuse the problem straight away.
The two calls are that Harry and Meghan should denounce this book, or we take it that they endorse it. And I say the King should, it would be very, very powerful if he said, look, you know, we're used to these books. We get 3, 5, 10 a year, but this one has crossed the line. We cannot allow it to go unchecked. Don't you think that would be powerful?
But I just don't think it's his style. I don't get that from Charles. He just doesn't seem like an assertive person to me.
Yeah, but I'm saying he should be assertive for once.
Well, he'd have to play it very, very, very cleverly, because otherwise you're just feeding into the drama.
Just say what I just said. Just say, look, royal books come out all the time. They are full of inaccuracies, but we don't comment. This one has crossed the line. And it has. Yeah. Everybody is shocked and appalled by just how spiteful, ruthless and horrible it is about everyone except Harry and Meghan.
Well, yes, and I think maybe he's hoping, just by keeping quiet, that they'll sort of expose themselves, that he doesn't need to make an intervention, that they'll just carry on and they'll keep lobbing grenades.
That's what they always do. I just say that if the royal family wanted to make an impact on this book, they should break their tradition and just say it's just not true and it has crossed the line. It would have a really powerful effect.